Hello, welcome to Suffragette City Radio. I am here with Dr. Julia Long. Hello.
Hi, Katie.
Hello. Hi. I'm just wondering, for our listeners, could you give us a little bit of background into your field of interest and how you basically got into feminism and what you've been doing since you've been into feminism?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I want to go quite that far because I'm getting on a bit now. So I suppose I first got exposed to feminist ideas really when I was at university, sort of the first time around.
Whereabouts did you study?
That would be, oh my God, it's all so old. But I won't dwell on this because it really is, it's like decades ago now. So I went to University of East Anglia.
Okay.
And so I suppose that I was really fortunate, like the time that I was studying was like in the mid-80s. And there were some like brilliant lecturers there, and in particular there was a woman called Suzanne Kapler who I don't know if you've ever come across her. Her name isn't really as well known now as maybe once upon a time, but while I was actually there and taking classes with her, she wrote a book called The Pornography of Representation, and that was like one of these books that I think really had a big impact on me. And it was she really had a brilliant mind, and it was actually I probably should go back and read it now because she took on a lot of the issues that are very current now, like free speech and things like that. But she as feminists, certainly radical feminists at the time, were very, very critical of this notion of free speech because obviously when we talk about free speech, it means men have no problem with free speech, and groups that are powerful have no problem.
Well, there's the porn arguments. Is always that it's my freedom of speech.
Of course, all of that. So she really kind of, I suppose, along with other brilliant writers and thinkers at the time, like Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin, she really exposed in like really kind of articulate and compelling way the sort of myth around free, these kind of oppositions between like free speech and censorship and that kind of thing. So I think that's given me a bit of a different take on a lot of what I see now in terms of so-called, I won't do my little inverted commas things because
well, it's on the radio.
It's on the radio. It's not really going to be obvious, but this so-called like gender critical movement. There's I think there's a lot of valorization, a lot of, I think personally, quite naive valorization of free speech as this thing that's good and that we should always kind of champion, without really having that depth of thought that someone like Sue Kapler and Andrew Dworkin and those radical feminists applied to it. So I was really fortunate back all those decades ago it is now to have been taught by a radical feminist, and there were other lecturers there that similarly were very kind of politicized, maybe in terms of Marxism and that kind of thing. I felt I had a really, it was really it was in the days where you really were exposed to a lot of very powerful and very revolutionary ideas, and certainly with being taught by Sue Kapler, I heard, who was it? They had a number of different visiting lecturers. They did a series. So I remember Sheila Jeffries came and spoke there, and Deborah Cameron, and I can't remember now, but it was a very very formative. It was really formative. But obviously it's so long ago now, I'm not going to do like a great long trajectory between like 1986 and now, but so that was like, it was really formative, and I do feel really fortunate to have been at university at that point.
Well, I went to uni, I went to Goldsmiths for my sins. But it was the history department was Sally Alexander was the head of the history department, and she's like a socialist feminist, and I didn't realise her actual background within the movement of back in the day, but when I was doing it, it seemed very depoliticized. Like didn't seem to be any like structural analysis, and with hindsight, I think it's just a lot of it was just like an radical feminism. It was mad, and I didn't realise it at the time, but it was. Somebody had an axe to grind.
And I mean, I know, like we had a bit of a chat earlier about this, but when I started teaching at Anglia Ruskin, and I did my PhD very late in life. Like I had lots of I worked in different areas, and I had quite a few different jobs before. I was like in my early 40s, I think, when I started doing the PhD. So then by the time I was working in that area, it was a very, very long time from when I first, studied at UEA, and then I ended up, working at Anglia Ruskin University. But because, as I was just saying to you before, I hadn't actually studied sociology. I'd done English literature originally, and then I'd kind of, over the years, migrated into sociology. And when I was looking at these, these really big chunky textbooks that are like the core textbooks for sociology, like Giddens and I don't know, Haralambous and these different ones, the representation of feminism, and specifically radical feminism, was really shocking to me. It was shocking, like this really grotesque misrepresentation.
Total straw man.
Oh my God, it was really So I do feel really fortunate of having access to those ideas in a way that it's really like, it just doesn't really happen now, I don't think, in this country anyway. But that's interesting you were saying about Sally Alexander, because she was actually on Woman's Hour earlier today, talking about the original 1970 Women's Liberation Movement conference at Ruskin College. And I don't really know that much about her, but she certainly comes across as a sort of heterosexual socialist feminist. Is sort of
I don't know.
Comes across it.
I mean, the course was. I was doing feminism, but I didn't realise it wasn't obviously a history department, so it's not just feminism, but it did have a feminist slant to it. If I wanted to get good marks, like all my dissertations, I'd always write it, speaking as a Marxist feminist. Oh, yeah. I'd always put like, do some focusing on women's or something. But I think you had queer theory sort of creeping in, because the department was very woman focused, but very like gay focused. And I remember we did a unit about the history of sexuality, and we studied like Havelock Ellis, but I've known like Sheila Jeffries' critique of this guy who's like a sexologist. And she has a very critical critique of him.
Of course.
But we didn't learn it. We learnt it without any kind of feminist analysis of it. It was just taken as almost as a neutral argument, which I think is really interesting. Right. And again, there was a lot of, you can see the creep into the academies of a lot of what's become. This was about 10 years ago now that I studied there, and it's when I look back,
well in by then,
and I've got it's all sorts. I did a unit on the history of witchcraft. I've got one of my old books, and it's literally just like why radical feminists are chatting shit about witchcraft, basically. And it's like so many ways, and I'm looking back and I'm like, that was...
God, that's hideous, isn't it? Especially about witchcraft, like then creating a whole new witch hunt against radical feminists. And like when you're talking about witchcraft, it's just one of life's nice little ironies now. But I actually did teach I'm a bit rusty now, so I'm not going to talk about it here, but I taught a module for a while Anglia Ruskin that had been previously taught by a gay man on sexuality and social control, so looking at the sexologist, and you just see such a difference in terms of that whole sort of tradition of gay men, and then what has become like queer politics being very celebratory about the sexologist, and heralding this whole new century of openness and liberation. And that's why I think Sheila's work and work of others as well, like Margaret Jackson, has just been like so invaluable in actually showing what effects that kind of work and the development of that whole area had for women is thoroughly oppressive and enforcing of heterosexuality, not just in the kind of ways that it had been previously enforced, but it's like now you have to enjoy it, and there's a real problem if if you're not having an orgasm with your husband in this in this particular way, we're gonna intervene. And anyway, it's problematic, and I think that it's presented in a neutral way, or like it's just always seen as progressive, whereas actually, like, I think Sheila Jeffries' critique that I've heard of Havelock Ellis is very much about, this was after the suffrage movement, men were trying to find a new way
they could regain control over women, and sexuality has been like the main way. And his research and those people were actually reacting against feminism, which I can't believe that I studied like a history department with a supposed feminist slant, and that was never raised, So
but isn't it the very awful thing is that we actually can believe it, because it just is par for the course that and I think what happens in academia now under the name of feminism is probably likely to be far more anti-feminist than something that's that's in a relatively neutral kind of department. That really is the way that things have gone. No, I have to say I'm really glad to be out of academia. Although there are things that I miss about it, because before that some years before that I'd been teaching in a sixth form college, and there's a lot that is really enjoyable, just the interaction with the students and engaging and discussing ideas. But I just think it's become I don't know, really they just should. I know we're supposed to support, there's all this whole kind of movement around free speech in academia, but I really feel the word feminism should be confiscated from most academic departments until they earn their stripes to use it.
Well, I think, to be honest, I think this is the reason why feminism has failed in many respects, that they went off to the academies and focused on this elite level. And I think, like, you can read a lot of books about feminism. I mean, I've hardly read any books, and I should probably sit down and read these books, but I feel like we've lost touch with really engaging with women's lives and speaking to people on a level in words they can understand. And when you take it and you put it into this elite academy, then suddenly people are arguing, but they've also got their political position to maintain, and then it becomes politicized. And you move away from actually the movement itself, and if you are trying to liberate women, but then a lot of they're using all this highfalutin language, and I think even within the gender critical debate, as I see it now, I think a lot of it's like, how could a normal woman understand this? And really, we say that we're like talking about the oppressed and how the impacts that these legislative changes will have on the most marginal women, except we're using language that's going to exclude them from the debate in the first place. And I don't know if that's an effect of going off to the academies and removing itself from the grassroots, perhaps. So I don't know, I'm a bit... that's just my perspective somewhat on it, because I see a lot of... I don't think that it's accessible for a lot of normal women to come into the debate and to listen and to actually raise their consciousness, to hear stuff and go, oh yeah, that rings true. But then if I have the conversation with like women in our own terms, like they get it all the time. Do you know what I mean? But if they hear it on a TED talk, they would just shut off.
Yeah, Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that it must have been incredibly exhilarating and have a huge sense of potential to be, getting involved and getting access to those kind of positions within academia at the time. And, certainly like from what I hear and like the little bit that I saw, I was a bit on the tail end of it, but from, what I saw, it was, really very exciting and life-changing. And I think, undoubtedly there was some, really important, brilliant work that was done. But I don't know if that can ever sort of be, if that can ever really be sort of that situation can come about again, because I think we do have to recognise as well, like obviously universities are thoroughly patriarchal and very class-based institutions. And like one of the things I really hated about it was the fact that we're putting this whole generation, or probably a couple of generations by now, of students into just like such debt. And it's,
50 grand and counting, and I'm going to do
and so like everything, whatever you're doing there in that in that classroom or in that lecture theatre, like it's all within that context. It's all just such a racket, and I really felt with some of the students that that I was teaching, that they were getting into horrendous debt, and there was still there's this notion that once someone goes to university it's because they want to learn and they're really interested in the subject, but there's a lot of students certainly that I saw who had gone to university because it was so expected of them. And even in terms of like doing the reading, there were a lot of students who really weren't that interested. Mind you, I have to say, when it came to some of the journal articles, I couldn't really blame them. Some of the sort of journal articles that they're expected to read, I have no huge patience with a lot of it myself. But the kinds of reading that, you know, I set in my, you know, feminist theory and practice class, or, you know, some of the others, I felt were exciting, and, you know, and the students on the whole would respond quite well. But I thought, a lot of them, you just really had quite a strong sense that they didn't want to be there. And so I thought, well, you shouldn't be here. You certainly shouldn't be putting, you know, getting into that degree of debt. It's really awful. So I think ultimately it was actually, I had a really, another one of these formative experiences of, I'd had a bit of a bad year in my sort of lecturing job. And I went to, I won't say the name of it because I think they tried to keep it a little bit under wraps, but I went to this amazing women's land in Europe, I would just say. It was such a fantastic week that I had, being in that, you know, thoroughly, mainly lesbian space, definitely women only space. And it was also around the time that, I don't know if you've ever come across the ideas of Sonia Johnson or read any of her stuff, or you might have seen there's a couple of... I'm
looking at your bookshelf, I can see you've got
one of those,
Johnsons.
Anyway, it was in her, I think it was in the collection Wildfire. There's a chapter in there called something like Escape from the Semiversity, or the Semiversity. So she, again, a bit like Mary Daly, she's very thoughtful about language. And so, you know, the idea of a university coming from the word universe and the sort of like grandiosity of it. So she said, well, it's a semiversity, it's certainly not a university. Yeah. And she had this chapter in there about escape from the university, and that was really kind of influential in me deciding, I'm going to leave. So, there are some things I miss about it, but to me it seems like you can have a much more fruitful movement and conversation, and, you know, whatever discussions, whatever you want to do, outside of that space now than you can inside.
I guess it's making impact, isn't it? It's where can you go and have an impact on society to bring your ideas into the main consciousness of the world, and
who are they going to be useful to, and you know, or who can you actually share things with and have a conversation. And I really feel it's women, it's adult human females, and you know, a lot of the women that I've spoken to or might have come across, you know, in relation to my work, wouldn't have had that opportunity to go to university, but like they certainly know what time of day it is in ways that unfortunately that's not really the case these days in academia. So
I mean, it's good that, I mean, like, it is good to have people in academia who are studying these things. It's just, I feel like you kind of can't be a revolutionary when you're like the dean of a school, can you? So, like, well, they try to be, you know, I'm pretty sure you've got an idea in your head of some of you. Well, yeah. So what is it you're doing now? You've moved away from the academies and you're working in, where are you working?
Yeah, so I work in the women's sector. Maybe I shouldn't, I don't know if I should say the name, because I don't want any bloody trouble to be heaped upon their heads. But anyway, I work for a women's sector organisation. And at the time that I left, you know, my lecturing job, I actually joined this organisation, and I was working on the sort of like frontline service provision in terms of supporting women who were experiencing male violence against women in the form of, you know, so-called like domestic violence. So I was doing that, but now I've got a research job there at the same place. So it kind of, in lots of ways, it really fits the bill for me, because I might as well say, actually, I work on the femicide census, the UK femicide census. So you know, those I feel quite lucky to be doing that, because those kind of research posts don't come up very often, certainly, you know, in the women's sector. So it's quite nice to be using at least some of my research skills doing that, and
valuable skills to learn, aren't they?
It kind of brings the two things together. Obviously the work itself is, you know, it's pretty relentlessly grim. But, you know, they kind of hope hope that it's doing a bit of good sort of in some way. And there's a small research team, so that's what I'm doing.
Fantastic. I don't know what to talk about now. We've been nattering. I've come over for dinner. We've been nattering away, and a bit of me's like, no, stop! Don't say this because we're going to do it on the podcast.
It's funny how it makes it different, because we were totally like interrupting each other, and it was. But then as soon as you got the old recorder going,
excuse me, Mom.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things I know that we'd started to talk about, and then we kind of stopped before, was about femininity, and that was something that I'd written a little piece about for you. So it was only about 10 lines, I think, because I remember it's really short.
Tiny little thing. I asked her for some comment. We did an event. First event we did was called Feminism, the Elephant in the Room, and it was basically just to give a platform to various women in the movement to talk whatever they wanted to about the big taboo in feminism. And for this, if you don't know what the branding of the podcast looks like, well, just look at the screen. It's black and white picture with big red lips. And I said, can I do a portrait of you, please, Julia? And she's like, no. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, well, I will write my critique, and you will understand why. And it was basically a critique of femininity and things like lipstick and gender norms and things like that.
Just so that women listening know. So it was. Yeah, was it? It had like whoever had written the piece. It had their face, and then it had these big red lips kind of imposed on it.
Yeah, on the top of it.
Yeah. So I remember you asking me that, and I just thought, oh no, I really don't want that. And I thought, oh no, Katie's going to think, oh no, here's this awkward woman who isn't going to be supportive to me with my project or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, there's no way I could have tolerated having. Like my photograph with these like red, very lipsticked kind of lips over the top of it, when the whole I just wouldn't in any circumstances, but certainly not when I'm like the thing that I'm writing is actually. Did that kind of lead me into writing that then? I can't remember.
I don't know. I think you were writing it, and then I said, "Oh, can I do a portrait of you? Because we'd like, we like to with everybody." And he's like, "No, but when you read my piece, you'll understand why I have." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
I mean, it's something, I can't remember the gist of what you were saying now, but it's something I do reflect on. I have been reflecting on a lot in the course of the arguments that we're having in, I guess, the gender critical movement and feminism more broadly is a critique of femininity. And can you summarise what it was that you said? Do you remember?
I can't remember at all, but I can certainly tell you what I think about it. I really have no recollection of what I said at that, in those little half a dozen lines. But I suppose if we go back, we were talking about your old lecturer Sally Alexander, and been involved in that women's liberation movement, that very early conference, and then another thing she was talking about on the radio today was about her involvement in the Miss World protest of 1970, and I think it's really striking now. Like, I suppose I've been quite involved in. I don't know how we want to talk about it, like the sort of current activism, such as it is, from when I came back from Ireland, which was around about sort of 2007. So it's sort of like, 12, 13 years now. And it just seems to me that it feels very, with a few exceptions, it feels very kind of limited and kind of constrained in terms of how we're thinking about women's liberation. Maybe we don't even really think about it. We think in terms of like feminism or gender critical or anti-porn or whatever. But obviously for those women back at that time, they really understood that the imposition of femininity, which takes lots of different forms, but one of the most visible and really sort of glaringly oppressive is all the kind of norms around beauty and fashion and wearing really uncomfortable shoes, and back in those days it was all I remember my mum having like panty girdles, which now there's like shapewear.
Well, now you have shapewear though. That's the thing.
It's all kind of been sort of repackaged and sold again, and so. Like what I know of women from that era, and certainly what I've seen and what I've felt myself, is that it's so clear that those are the trappings of women's oppression, and that you probably know about when they were in the States and they had they had their Miss America pageant or Miss Universe.
Is that when they burn the bras?
Well, here we go. So there was
all
that's
this, a misnomer, that, isn't it?
Sort of myth about this sort of bra burning, but they had this, they called it a freedom trash can, and women brought along eyelash curlers and I don't know, all like, I don't even know, because, you know, it was before I think I was about 3 or 4 then, but mascara and girdles and, you know, high heel shoes and all that, and chucked it all in the bin. And it was this really exhilarating thing. And I don't know, I just think I'm really quite puzzled as to why that hasn't happened. And I've been around in this sort of current milieu of activism since I came back, since I came to London in 2007. We actually did have, in 2010, they'd brought the bloody Miss World contest back to the UK, and it hadn't been here for ages, or it certainly hadn't been televised. Anyway, I think it hadn't been around for ages. And so we did, it was one of the really enjoyable actions I remember that I was involved in. We got some of sort of the newer generation got in touch with women who'd been at that original protest. I think it's probably still up on YouTube, actually. I hope it is. So we had this kind of like, intergenerational protest against the Miss World. And we did this, how did we do it now? We did a freedom trash can thing, but we did it a bit kind of an updated version. So women were bringing in, like, I don't know, makeup and stuff, but also things like lads mags, there's all this lads mags and skin lighteners and, this kind of thing. But I don't really, it seems to me, I think that's why I wanted to write about it for your, that project you were doing about the elephant in the room. It seems like it's still, there's so much resistance to actually sitting and talking about like what femininity is and why it is so harmful, like the way that these kind of norms of appearance and everything that Andrea Dworkin talked about, the way that the sort of what beauty standards do to women's freedom, basically totally curtail and our freedom, not just the physical freedom in the obvious way, but also our creativity and our intellectual freedom. And I just think those are such powerful insights, but it doesn't seem to have gained much traction. And one of the things, sorry, I can see you taking a breath, but I'm on a bit of a roll now, so I'm not going to let you do it. And I think, I don't know, one of the things that it seems to me is that, and I've certainly been part of this as well myself, particularly, when I, like early on when I was involved in all the anti-porn activism and that kind of thing, is that I think we've tended to see patriarchy or male-dominated society, or however we want to talk about it, as this thing that's kind of over there that we have to be making some sort of
like an external enemy,
and the way in which you tackle it is by having endless I'll try not to swear now, but like endless conferences that are all more or less about the same thing, and marches and placards and petitions, and it's over there in the government, or it's over there in the Tavistock, or it's over there somewhere else, or it's over there in this I don't know, Stonewall, or it's over there in the porn industry, and we have to endlessly be like going bang bang bang, but and kind of railing against it, rather than actually seeing the very, very intimate nature of women's oppression, which is around heterosexuality and femininity.
So you were to say, like, taking it back to the personal is political. So looking at the personal decisions we make in our lives and reflecting on those decisions.
I knew there was a simpler way of saying it. See, it's been a while since I've had one of these conversations, so I'm a bit rusty, but the most like bleeding obvious. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously that was the key insight of the women's liberation movement, that the personal is political. And so I wouldn't necessarily even see it in terms, certainly not to begin with, in terms of our decisions and our choices, because obviously these things are imposed on us. They're not particular decisions. Often they're done like in a quite a,
it's subconscious, a lot of it. Like, why do I think that I look better with makeup on? I mean, I mean, I'm not a big wearer of makeup. Basically, I'd say I put it on when I'm trying to get sex. If I'm going out and I want to look pretty, I'll put makeup on. I know that's it's true.
But that's a brilliant.
But like, why is that? And it works. Then great. So it does work.
I think that's a brilliant insight into the relationship between. The sort of totally constructive and very coercive relationship between like women, the objectification of women, and heterosexuality, or maybe even, I don't know what circles you mix in, but possibly even now, in some lesbian circles as well, but certainly within, that kind of routines and rituals and expectations and norms around women's sexual objectification is totally like that is totally required by men society. In terms of male sexual access to women. And I do remember actually
but I don't know, I feel like it comes across with women though as well, like women, I wouldn't say they expect it of you, but like people are shallow and are attracted to beautiful things. Oh, that's an interesting choice of words. Thing. But even in the animal kingdom, like, I feel like if we're talking about
carry on. Maybe I'll just sit back and let you. No.
Right. I like aesthetics though, and I feel like I don't know. I like quite a peacock. I like to dress how I like to dress, and I like. I don't wear makeup all the time, but sometimes I like putting it on. I like putting on a nice dress, nice skirt, and I think the problem is that it's an imposition on us by society, and it's not something that we've created our own cultural understanding. But I don't know, I do quite like beauty as a thing. It exists in the animal kingdom. Like, think about all the birds of paradise. They spend all of their evolutionary history, like all of them years and years, and what are they doing? They're getting some really pretty feathers. I mean, seriously, like, they spend a lot of time trying to look fit. So, I mean, I think that it's something which, if you look at, for instance, like, native tribes, if you travel back in history, adornments were not seen as a particularly feminine thing. They were both sexes would adorn themselves.
Yeah, I don't know. So I'm inclined just to do a little bit of a short circuit and say, have you read Sheila's Beauty and Misogyny? Because you probably want to have a read of that and then come back with all of that kind of those sort of ideas. But I mean, I think to me, like you said quite a lot there. Where do I start? For a start, when we talk, I think we have to be really precise in our language, and when we say these things are imposed on us by society, we have to remember that we're talking about male-dominated society, and it is about male expectations, even though it does then tend to be women sort of policing each other, and lots of encouragement around it, and and all these kind of rituals about, I don't know, complimenting other women on hairstyles and clothing, and all of that kind of stuff. But that's typical kind of oppressed behaviour, isn't it? That once you've got a system set in place and a group that's in a position of power, you can rely then on the oppressed to just basically police each other and do the work for you. And when you were saying about beauty is this lovely thing, I don't know. To be honest, it's so long since I've even. I don't know, I just don't think like that anymore. So, what I've got ringing in my ears was a really interesting conversation that I had with just a small group of female students when I was teaching, after we'd had, I can't remember, it was some kind of seminar about beauty practices, and we'd kind of finished, and then we were just chatting, and as sort of so often happens, the most interesting conversations, probably a bit like us with this recording, the most interesting conversations as soon as it's not being recorded, but the most interesting thing happened once we'd sort of stopped the seminar and we were just sort of speaking quite frankly, and the level of sheer kind of tyranny of their bodies that these young women totally took as normal and knew nothing else. They were all saying that ever since they were, I don't know, basically pubescent, or age 11 or 12, they'd started shaving under their arms and shaving their legs, and they had to do that, and that they would always wear makeup, and they'd never really seen themselves looking really sort of any different to that. And I said, and the thing is, it's not like I'm any different. I'm not outside of that. Like I grew up, and in fact, I really have well, actually, as you get older you kind of lose some of it, but I'm a particularly hairy person, and I had a lot of body hair, and I was really
a lot of trauma around it,
a lot of horrible teasing at school, really horrible, like nastiness, that was, I would have done, and I did do anything to like get out of that, having electrolysis, all this kind of stuff that I had when I was sort of in my teens, so I know what it's like. But when I said to these young women, these female students, like if someone didn't do all this, like or doesn't, if you know any girls who don't do that, how would that impact on their life if they didn't? And then one of them just looked really aghast and just said, you'd just be an outcast. And so again, I think when we're talking about obviously like transgenderism, and so you can really see for girls who don't do all that, it's like, well, it's much
you've got harder for them, it's making it harder for everybody else.
You've got this straightforward option to just say that you're a boy and to actually believe you are a boy, and then you go from being this outcast, and we haven't even got on to talking about whether she's lesbian or whatever, but someone who doesn't want to do all that stuff, there's this real sort of social punishment. So to me, these are the things that are really important about it. And I think, go on. We're getting into our stride now.
This is something that I feel like has been making me reflect, because like I am going on, like, I'm aesthetic, I like wearing pretty things, like, I'm not, if you see my style, I'm not super feminine or anything, but I do have long hair. I occasionally wear makeup. I get my eyebrows done. It's my only, I don't have a beauty regime, I do my eyebrows.
So when you say, sorry, just because I really am quite out of touch now.
Yeah.
When you say you get your eyebrows done, like, who does them?
I get them
when
threaded.
You say you get them done,
I get them
who
done.
does?
A lady does them.
Who do you let on your face?
I think threading. She gets like the string and threads.
But what?
They just pull it out at the root. They pull all your hairs out with thread.
But how does that work with thread?
It's amazing. It's a little bit masochistic though. It does hurt a little bit. And then they dye, and then I get them dyed, and I get my eyelashes done. But there's quite a little bit of a ritualistic element to it, which I do quite like. However, I am reflecting a lot about my own beauty regimes, and a lot of it comes from listening to detransitioners and to women who basically say they felt, because they didn't like to shave and they didn't like to do the beauty regimes, they almost got kicked out of womanhood. And I feel like if we want to create this inclusive idea for women that you can be gender non-conforming and still be a woman, if I'm saying all that but I'm not living it, like, I could set an example, couldn't I, by not shaving? So maybe I'm being hypocritical to say, of course you don't need to shave to be a woman. It's like, well, you say that, but then you're doing it, aren't you? So I'm coming around more to it. I am thinking about these things, but it's just such an interesting topic, is to think about your own complicity within the systems of oppression and the way that beauty norms are upheld by women within the system. Even myself, who is critical of it and I don't identify as a feminist, but is quite a switched on person, I'm not totally rejecting of all of the things that have been imposed upon me.
And I think that's a really interesting point, and that's something again that I sort of see in this, I don't even really want to call it a movement, but this whole gender critical phenomenon. And you probably, if I said to you, I really hate the term gender critical, because
nobody likes that term.
Really?
Everybody
even the ones who use it.
Well,
I'm using it here.
I mean, we use it. I mean, it describes describes certain things, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's totally euphemistic, because it avoids naming men, it avoids naming like men who pretend to be women, and a lot of the women who claim to be gender critical actually aren't particularly critical of gender. In fact, manifestly not, in terms of
presenting in a feminine manner.
Feminine manner. And also, since when are we just merely critical of patriarchy? We're not. We're thoroughly, we reject gender, and we are thoroughly, we understand patriarchy as a system of oppression. We're not just patriarchy critical. So why are we just gender critical? Like, if it's a system of oppression. But anyway, I've lost my train of thought now. But when you were saying all that to me, I mean, I think, yeah, that was one of the things that really frustrated me, and I suppose why I have taken like quite a step back from a lot of all this activism in this area is that I just got a bit fed up with seeing this, basically hearing certain words coming out of mouths of so-called gender critical activists, and but then looking around the room and seeing everyone giving a totally different message. And I was
optics.
I was
the
at
optics
a couple
of the message.
It's, I think, if basically the way that humans communicate is we always believe what we see over what we hear. And like, we know that children, you know, like there's a kind of cliche of like, oh, telling your kids, don't do what I say, no, don't do what I do what I say, because obviously the children are going to be, saying, oh well, you say to do this, but you do something else, and and we know, like, in things like body language, like if I'm like, if I was really yawning here and you said, are you tired? I'll say, no, I'm fine. You're going to believe my yawn before you believe the words. And so I think there's a lot of hot air, and obviously we're generating a bit more of it now because we're just sat here talking. But I think there's so many words that have been spilled over this thing now. More and more, like, we don't really need any more, because I kind of think, like, pretty much it's all been said, and now all we're doing is endlessly responding to what the latest sort of
drama,
trans kind of atrocities are. But there were a couple of events, like one was a public meeting in the House of Commons, and another one was one of these big, gatherings with public speakers and stuff. And everyone was like saying all the usual stuff, which I have heard the same things sort of over and over for quite a number of years now. So it's just also partly trying to avoid the boredom setting in. But I looked around and I was just so struck by how, all right, we can say endlessly, like, it's just become such a cliche now, like, oh, sex and gender aren't the same thing, sex and gender are two separate things, da 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 da. But then if everyone is carrying on as if they are the same thing, so if I have a sex body that is female and I present in this way, I have long hair and makeup and I dye my hair and I've got jewellery and blah 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 blah, and all the blokes in the room have all got like short hair, and all the women are smiling a lot more, and all the men are just sat there because they don't need to smile, that, and they've got a shirt and tie on it, and they're all saying all this stuff, and then they're blaming, oh, it's what's happening at the Tavistock, oh, it's what's happening in Parliament, it's what's happening in the media, it's what's happening over there. And it just got to a point, and then again I felt that was such a taboo, because if I have them raised that,
people take it personally, don't
they? They take it as an attack. So that's why now I don't know, I'm really not hugely active, but it's quite nice to have this opportunity to think it through a little bit more. And I was struck by what you were saying then about this influence of, again, these so-called, if we want to use this term, detransitioned, even that's quite a meaningless term. I mean, when you were telling me that about this, the threading and, these different sort of, beauty regimes, I immediately, my reaction to that is actually, it sounds a really unpleasant and quite violent and violating thing.
Well, they all are. If you think about most beauty regimes, they involve like pain.
Yeah,
pain,
of course. That old
even shaving, you putting your razor blade to your legs.
Really excruciating and really, really harmful and damaging. And obviously, there's loads of things that are, in terms of like the cosmetic surgery and all of this stuff as well, and waxing, like for years I waxed my legs, and it's really painful, just like horrible thing. And so I think we've kind of turned women's liberation into a bit of a charity kind of thing, where we're always supposed to be doing good for other women. And you immediately said, oh, it's a bit contradictory if I'm saying this to detransitions. But I think before you even think about detransitions, I think, like, it kind of upsets me to think of you doing that to yourself, and that was eventually, and it, I did, do some of this sort of hair removal and makeup. Really, I was like very, probably longer than I care to admit. But then, like, once I stopped doing it, I think now, like, and that's that's over like quite a good number of years now. You just experience your body and your body and your whole being in such a different way. Like, I don't think of I don't really think of, I was going to say, I don't think of my eyelashes as something to be adorned with, but I don't really think about my eyelashes ever unless I get money. Yeah. But do you know what I mean? Like the thought of actually getting some sort of like, you know, paintbrush and put it, that would mean that I'm seeing myself as an object to be decorated.
You're making yourself self-conscious about yourself.
Yeah, and not just self-conscious, but you are treating your body as an object, and that is exactly what we're supposed to do. And it's so liberating not to do that.
Yeah,
it's so liberating, and I think, I don't know, maybe these conversations are happening, and
I think they are. I mean,
I really hope so, because it's just taking everyone so fucking long.
Well, it's
and you
a
think
process.
In Korea it's taken them like about 5 minutes, but
my idea is that it's a process, and that like I'm starting to have these conversations, think about it myself, reflect on it myself. I also feel like, you know, a lot of women in the gender critical movement, it's a lot of women who are coming into it for the first time. And, you know, sometimes as well, like people's beauty, people's relationship to femininity can be a bit more complicated than you might imagine. Like, I am thinking, for example, like if I was wearing gold hoop earrings, that to me, that would maybe look like I was doing femininity. But you can also describe other things, like to me that would be a bit of a class thing, like a way to sort of show, you know, you're sharing other things. And I think about, for example, women who wear saris or wear the hijab in a funny way. Like the hijab, for example, is seen as this like a massive patriarchal imposition. But I think a lot of young women, especially in the West, it's like a fuck you to white supremacy. It's a reaction. It's a sign that you are saying fuck you to, you know, all of the shit that you get being raised in this society. So to have like this basic understanding of it, like sometimes it is a bit more complicated than that, and that people's relationship to femininity cannot always be as black and white as we might like to maybe see it as. And if I'm gonna waste my breath on something, maybe I'm gonna not put my focus of energies on that. I'm not sure. To me, I just feel like it's not gateway feminism, and I don't know if it's something that I would put my energies into.
What do you mean? Put your energies into what?
Like if I had my resources that I could use to fight, like you're saying, fight battles, I wouldn't use it to fight femininity, because I feel like it's something that you can develop over time. The more you are in the movement, you do start to reflect on these things. But like for women, working class women, like really, does it help them to sort of go in there guns blazing about femininity? Is it going to make people pull back a little bit from the movement itself? Because it seems to be like it's asking a lot of people personally. And if you're in a privileged position, maybe you can start to make these decisions. But if you're at like the grindstone with an abusive boyfriend and like, you know, you're getting by on universal credit, or you're a single mother, is this the most important issue in your life?
But I think you're I don't know, I find it a bit strange how you're framing that, because it's a bit like, oh, there's a bit of a list, and oh, let's just pick our battles and maybe go for this one rather than that one, and it's all about kind of persuading. If you're going to try and persuade someone to do something, like, I just don't really see it like that. I mean, everything you've told me about like your engagement with femininity is all about you actually choosing to positively do things, not to reject them, not to so actually you're spending money and time on doing these things. And I think we have to remember where these things come from. And I'm like, ultimately, like, I have absolutely no control over what any other, and I wouldn't want to have control over what any other woman does or, you know, doesn't do in terms of putting on makeup or whatever. But what I can do is reject it myself and say what I think about it and what I understand as to where it comes from, because we know that you know, women, and like in terms of the tyranny, and I think I do see it absolutely as so central. It's so central because it's about our relationships with our bodies. And I think as soon as you I think femininity is a kind of a grooming mechanism for heterosexuality, and I think the two things go totally hand in hand. First of all, because you have to be the desirable object in order to be further objectified by, you know, male, men wanting to fuck you basically. But also in terms of the practices, like I think once you've got women, and obviously I think it's much worse when you are young. Like it was much easier for me to reject all this stuff once I'd left school, because if I'd gone around like with hairy legs when I was at school, it just would have been
social pariah.
Even though I kind of did my best to deal with them, I still had that sort of really horrible bullying and name calling. It's really horrible. I've kind of lost, but I think in terms of the kind of norms that we have now, and I do see sometimes I am quite out of touch with it, but I do see this whole thing of like makeup tutorials.
It's so much now. It's so much worse than it has been. I mean, I didn't grow up in that. I grew up with like grunge was around and like Britpop and that, so I didn't ever have to do that, perform that femininity. But my younger friends, 10 years younger, it's just their world, like totally hyper feminine, and you can understand why girls think that if they don't do femininity, then they're not actually a woman, because that's what's of course in the ether at the moment.
And I think it's really important, I don't know, just to be honest about it and to say that I see that as the most really like a grotesque socialization and a grotesque coercion of young women, that they're expected to do all these terrible things that are very harmful and very wasteful of the little money that they might have, and so it's not like, oh, I want to get my bloody whip out and say, right, you mustn't do this, but actually the word liberation means something, and I think it's about liberation from those things, and when you were saying that about hijab and saris and like working class women and femininity, all the rest of it, well, okay, they might be giving a bit of a fuck you to white Western society or white supremacy, or to class, sort of class oppression or something. But they're certainly not to the men who are deciding, because obviously all of these things come from different, sort of variations of patriarchy, don't they? And I don't see how, like, to me, like they're all a form of like obedience to patriarchy. So I don't see how, any of the, but it's down for women, I guess, as where we find ourselves to be, to be liberating ourselves and so but it's funny how as soon as you start to even talk about it, then you're seen as in some way being kind of oppressive, whereas all I'm saying is
stop oppressing yourself.
Or I'm not even saying stop, but I'm saying this is how I find it, and this is, and also in terms of the kind of norms, like I don't know, I guess I am in a minority, but when I see very feminized women who are very feminized in their appearance, all I see is obedience. I just see obedience and subordination.
I think that you can do a lot for women and still conform to gender, and you can do nothing for women, because this annoys me sometimes. I feel like some people, it's almost like a bit of a subculture thing. It's like you have to dress a certain way and look a certain way, and then you're like a better feminist than a woman who still does hair and makeup and things. And it's to me, it can in a way it can have its own kind of problems, where again I think that a lot of what you say is true, but like I'm very much I feel like my feminism is very much like pragmatic and not idealistic, and maybe it's too much pragmatism, because then you lose touch with what you're actually trying to do. You're just doing things and you're not thinking about joining the dots between.
But it's quite pragmatic. It's quite pragmatic to stop spending money on like makeup and fashion. Like that's quite pragmatic choice to make in terms of time and limited time and resources. But I mean, without talking particularly about individuals, and obviously women can be doing amazing things. And well, I think again, like if a woman is doing these things that are basically sort of dictated and coerced by a patriarchal society, I don't think in that regard at least she's liberated. I think, and when I say she, I don't mean that particular individual. I mean any of us.
Yeah.
Because it's thoroughly oppressive, and and the whole point of femininity as a kind of way of presenting or a way of appearing, because obviously femininity is a lot more than just that. It's
behaviour codes,
yeah,
of
course it is.
Anything else.
It's a whole range of things. It's not just about this, but in that regard, it's about signifying a subordinate position. That's what it's about, because men don't have to do it, and men won't do it because it is, unless they decide they want to pretend to be women.
Well, it's a long-winded thing, and it takes a lot of time. I'm always shocked when, my mates will say like they spend like an hour on their makeup every day, and I'm like, how? What? And that's like in a daily life, when you've got a working life, an hour is about all the free time that you have in life, really, isn't it?
And
do you know what I mean? You have to get up an extra hour and put on your makeup. Of course,
women have less time than men, less money than men. All of these things. And so again, I think we just have to go back and think about, what do these words mean? There's a conference coming up at the weekend, Women's Liberation. But I really wonder how much time is going to be spent there thinking about what that word liberation means, because I think a woman that is doing that, and those of us in that sort of social circle that are supporting those kind of behaviours and not questioning them, or not supporting someone to stop doing that, because it can be very difficult and bring up a lot of fear and insecurities. But it's certainly, you can't possibly be liberated when when that's you're kind of enslaved in that way.
What do you think? We should wrap up a little bit because we've been gabbing. However, I just would be interested to know, what do you think accounts for women's defensiveness when it comes to critiquing of femininity? Why do you think women are so, and do see it as almost like an attack, like you are imposing something on them when you just say no, don't do anything? What do you think accounts for women's reactions to the critique?
I would, and again, it kind of jars a bit. I'm not saying don't do anything. I don't think any of us respond well to being told what to do and what not to do. I know I don't, and I'm sure you don't, and I don't think any of us do. But to me, the important question always is, what is this thing about? Whether it's pornography or transgenderism or femininity or heterosexuality or poverty or whatever, it's what is it about, and how, and when there are these practices that women are supposed to do, like all the beauty practices and fashion and all the rest of it, what is that about, and what function does that fulfill within society? And to me, it's it's so clear that it's about ensuring women's symbolic subordination, and it's about ensuring women's preoccupation with self criticism or even self-hatred of our bodies, and all of these sort of things. So that's what it's about, rather than for me, and then thinking what do I want to do, and then hopefully have more conversations about it. But it's not about saying, oh, don't do this or don't do that. But I do think as long as women are doing that, I don't think that we can we can even begin to taste the sweetness of liberation while women are still enslaved and doing all these really terrible and harmful things and thinking of our bodies as objects. But I think the defensiveness, I think probably comes out because it's much easier to go stomping up and down the streets with a placard in your hand, shouting and making a big fuss as to how wrong someone else is or how oppressive someone else is. But I think because the way in which identity and appearance and sexuality are all so bound up with our experience of will I be loved, what sort of status will I have in this social group, and it's so kind of personal to us that I think it's our defensiveness is really to be expected. And I feel myself in terms of I think it is different as you get older anyway, because you're just not perceived in that same objectifying way. So it does kind of
nature makes the choice for you in a funny way, doesn't
it? But also I remember for years being part of lesbian communities where there was still a lot of judgment around bodies, and there's still a kind of like imposition of maybe not quite the same, but of some kind of beauty standards and norms, and feeling like I didn't really belong there in lots of ways either. So I feel that as lesbian feminists, and maybe not just particularly as lesbian feminists, but as women who, you know, care about these things and care about women's liberation, that I really feel it's up to us to create as warm and loving an environment as possible to really value women without doing all of that palaver to our bodies, and to value women, you know, women in our sort of wholeness, and as being, you know, complete women without having to harm ourselves in those ways. I think that's a really crucial thing that we can all be doing, rather than going around saying, oh, you should or shouldn't be doing that. Having said that, I do find it really frustrating, the fact that women who, you know, I know have had access to these ideas, have had the chance to like insist on doing it. I can't say it, you know, I'm only human, and it does really frustrate me. It really, and it means that I'm probably not going to spend that my friendship with those women, or, you know, the amount of time I want to spend with them is probably going to be quite limited, because I actually get to a point where I can't really bear to look at red lipstick on a woman's face. I just can't bear it.
Well, it's been an interesting chat. I feel like wide ranging, and it's like I say, it's femininity is something that keeps reoccurring to me in my thoughts as I'm doing my feminism, and it's like a very complicated relationship that we all have as women with femininity. And again, I think a lot of the defensiveness is because it is such a personal thing, and you have to really look inwards and think, it's about insecurities, isn't it, and all the impositions, and like it's easy to fight the enemy that lives out there, like Donald Trump in the White House. Everybody can go and stand there and go, fuck white supremacy, fuck patriarchy, fuck. I mean, that's easy, but actually going, hang on a minute, why do I feel so ugly if I haven't got makeup on? Why am I, you know, replicating this? And that's really painful, and that's like, so again, it's just something that I'm processing, like on a longer term thing. But, you know,
that's interesting. But also saying this whole, I mean, I think again, like to go right back to that, you know, insight that the person who is political, it's when we start to realise actually this thing that I thought was over there is actually right in here, and I'm actually doing that oppressor's work for them.
I'm handmaidening.
I'm sort of doing it to myself, and I think it's that insight is very painful and distressing, but it's worth kind of really thinking what is that about, and pushing through it, because I think it's just, you know, far more liberating to leave it behind. And I think, you know, when you were saying about femininity women having a complex relationship to it, I think with a lot of these things it's actually not that complex. I don't think it is. I think to me it's really crucial that we reject gender, and then it's through that rejection and finding, oh, this is harder than that. That's how we then find a kind of a bit of an agenda for ourselves as to where, you know, where our analysis is taking us.
Yeah, where our energy should go, what we need to work on.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll wrap up now because we've been banging on for ages. But,
we have. everyone's long gone, and it's just us two.
I'm still listening, guys.
We've got to do their makeup.
Guys, no, you didn't. We didn't do any gossiping about anybody. If that's what you're waiting for.
No. We'll turn the machine up and we'll start then. But thank you, Katie. I want to say thank you so much for this opportunity, and hats off. Like, seriously, I'm really I'm very full of admiration for what you're doing, and you've got great energy, and I hope that our paths cross plenty of times, because
sure they will.
I'll have to head up to Manchester again once the weather turns a bit nicer.
Well, the 8th it's the 8th. It's long past by the time this will come out, but if you fancy it in a week's time, still got some tickets left, so.
Okay.
Okay, this is Suffragette City Radio signing out.